Welcome to another developer log for Eyes of the Sky. I spent at least 3 videos now talking about the combat system for the game, and while I still have a lot more to improve about it, there is more to the game than just the combat. In this devlog, I will share how I designed the levels for the game. After all, unless we're talking about a combat arena fighter, this is how the game is actually going to play, with the player going through the level and defeating enemies while trying to get to the end goal, and exploring the level along the way. I will share everything from how I start each level to how I block it out and eventually how I do an art pass to make it look good. Stick around if you found that interesting and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, feel free to check my previous devlogs on my channel, where I discuss the combat in more detail. I took some time at first to think about how I wanted to structure my levels and how I wanted each of them to flow. I knew I wanted to have some combat encounters with the game's enemies, of course, since this was an action game, but I also knew that it was important to have some downtime between combat encounters during which the player could explore. I had already made some basic platforming mechanic I could use in my levels, such as a double jump, air dash, and ledge grab, which I figured I could base my exploration around. I decided to do my first couple of levels with that concept in mind, meaning a main path through the level with some combat encounters that would block the player's progress, and branches of the main path that the player could explore and do some platforming to reach optional areas. These optional areas should have at least some sort of collectible in them so that players have an incentive to go off the main path and explore. To achieve that, I went ahead and commissioned a chest that I could place in the level. For now, it gives you some basic currency to use at the skill shop, but I do plan on expanding the progression system to be a bit more than just a skill shop. But we'll have to wait for a future video, however. Hiding these chests in various places allowed me to really test the platforming mechanics of the game and make the game in general more fleshed out. Now that I had a basic concept for a level in mind, it was time to start designing. Starting each level out with a basic blockout is common practice in the industry, as it enables level designers to quickly test and iterate on level design. This typically includes using basic shapes to block out the main level paths, enabling you to test out gameplay mechanics and tweak the level easily before finally doing an art pass and replacing those basic shapes with actual game assets. I did an online course that explains a lot of basic concepts for level design, and while I'm far from being an expert, I do feel that my levels are at least starting to get better. The first step is to start each level out with a basic top-down map, so I made some in Inkscape, which is a free alternative to Adobe Illustrator. This shows the basic outline of the level, the path I wanted the player to take, and any combat or cutscene beats I wanted them to hit while they played the level. Then I blocked out the shape in Unreal Engine using the modeling mode, specifically the cube grid tool, which was especially useful and it allowed me to quickly build and change a blockout by extruding from a grid of cubes. It's kind of like 3D pixel art, and I highly recommend you try it if you ever want to do a blockout using Unreal Engine. Next, I placed the main combat encounters throughout the level, as planned out in the map. Then I playtested again and again and made adjustments until I was happy with the result. Once I had the main path down, I started adding side content. I added collectible chests throughout the level, some in obvious locations and others in more hidden away spots. Finally, I playtested again, now with the added side content, and fixed any issues I could find until I was satisfied. Currently, I only have a few playable levels that I think are ready for playtesting by people other than myself. I have a hub world, a tutorial, and 2 more levels that I blocked out. The first level is actually one of the first levels I ever made, which I made over a year ago. I built it before I even did my level design course. I'm not sure if it will make it into the final game, but it's a good exercise nonetheless, and I think it would be nice to walk through it as it demonstrates a lot of my design principles. It starts out in a pretty open area. There's a chest right at the start to let the player know that they can expect to find chests in the level. The main path forward only has one mandatory fight, then the level opens up a bit to allow exploration. I hid chests in various locations with the intent that they would all be reachable without using the double jump ability. Like for example, up on this mini roof, this jump requires a very tight input, but it's possible thanks to the ledge grab mechanic. Right after this, there's another chest where the player must use the air dash ability to cross this gap and grab the ledge. Some chests are out in the open, but are guarded by enemies which you must defeat to open the chest. This side path here leads to a chest and then loops the player back to an earlier area. They can drop down, or if they look carefully, they can actually spot an additional chest waiting below. Finally, there's yet another chest on the rooftop across from the player. The player can jump and cross the gap to reach it. Placing collectibles in clever hiding places like these really encourages players to keep exploring and experimenting with the platforming mechanics and gives you a nice break from combat. This next level is one I did recently. This one contains a lot more mandatory fights, as well as a goal, and finally it ends with a boss fight. Again, we have chests in obvious locations. chests requiring platforming, and chests guarded by enemies. This time I placed a couple of chests in a spot requiring the double jump ability, which the player won't have on their first visit to this level. However, levels are meant to be revisitable, so they could come back after they unlock the double jump ability and get these chests. The rest of this newer level focuses more on combat. I specifically experimented with more verticality here by adding combat on rooftops. At first I blocked out the rooftop area with barriers, which if you want to know how I made, I have a tutorial for that. I was worried about the player knocking enemies off the roof and then having to fall down and finish them off, but I eventually figured out how to get enemies to jump back up onto the rooftop. Finally, for the hub world, I focused much more on platforming since there's no combat. A lot of the collectibles here require abilities that are gained later in the game. Placing collectibles in locations requiring more advanced abilities and platforming means that when players finally do unlock these abilities, they will feel much more rewarded, as they now know they can access many more areas which they could not before. After the blockout is complete, it's time to do an art pass, which means replacing all the basic boxes for actual game-ready art assets. As you may have seen in my previous upload, I recently got some amazing environment art that I commissioned for the hub world. This is the Memoryscape, the hub world which the player is planned to spend a lot of the game returning to. This is where you would level up, unlock abilities, talk to NPCs, and explore and find various secrets. So after making the basic blockout, I replaced all the basic shapes with assets that I commissioned for this hub world. The hub world is made out of various islands, those floating platforms you see in the clouds, and they are all planned to be added as the game progresses. For now I placed 4 main ones in. I did an art pass on most of them, starting out with the big blocking props like platforms and libraries, and finally adding decorative props like pillars, grass and flowers. The player is planned to be able to talk to NPCs here, but there isn't a dialogue system yet. I have done some work on a dialogue system, but it's not ready for integration. Of course I would also need models and animations for those NPCs, so that is still a ways off. I also used the same art assets for the tutorial level, mainly to see how it meshes together in a different and more linear structured level. The tutorial is something I finished a while ago, and it's nice to see it use actual art assets now and not just grey boxes. Personally, I think this environment has a lot of potential, and I'm happy to be able to use it in more than just the hub world. Overall, I think the progress in this area has been very satisfying. For me, it's really exciting to see the art of the game progress, since I've spent so long just working on the gameplay. My main goal is to make a playable demo that shows off the game to potential publishers and to players. With that in mind, the level design side of things is very important, as it shows what the game will be like when it's scaled up. A dialogue system would be needed soon, so I started work on that, as well as a basic storyboarding for cutscenes. As for gameplay, the next step would be making a progression system. I started by making a very basic ability upgrade system that lets you buy abilities with currency, gained by defeating enemies, but I'm planning on doing something more interesting with that. If you enjoyed watching this devlog and found it interesting, you can like the video, subscribe and follow my progress on Twitter. Thank you for watching, and I hope to be able to share even more progress soon.